This video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN. So, in a couple previous videos, I covered the Sonic games that came out for the Game Gear as well as the Game Boy Advance, and now it's the Nintendo DS's turn. These games all but flew past my radar when they first came out, so I don't have much experience with them, but now I'm gonna take a look at the handful of Sonic games that came out for the DS. Today, let's check out what Sega brought to the table when representing their mascot on Nintendo's successor to the Game Boy line. But first, I want to take a minute to talk about this video's sponsor, Surfshark. By now, I'm sure many of you know what a VPN is, but for those who don't, it's basically a piece of software that lets you virtually place your computer or phone anywhere in the world, allowing you to access the internet as if you were currently in a different country. This allows you to not only visit websites and view content that may not be available in your region, but it also adds an extra layer of security to help keep your personal information safe. Region restriction is a huge pain, and if you've ever wanted to watch a show or YouTube video only to find out it's not available in your region, you probably understand how frustrating it is. With Surfshark, you can completely bypass these restrictions and enjoy region-free content. So if you've ever been disappointed to find out you couldn't watch a show on Netflix because you were in the wrong region, with Surfshark, you can watch. Surfshark also happens to be the only VPN on the market to offer the usage of just one account on an unlimited number of devices. If you'd like to check out Surfshark, you can use the code GILLY to get 85% off plus 3 extra months entirely free. And Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk if you'd like to try it out and see if it's right for you. Link is in the description below, and thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Alright, so I'm gonna go in order of release, and I'm only gonna cover strictly Sonic the Hedgehog games, no Sega party games or crossovers, so you're not gonna see Sonic playing tennis or doing gymnastics today. With that out of the way, let's get into it. The first Sonic game to be released on the DS is Sonic Rush, a game which absolutely lives up to its name. It features Blaze the Cat as a playable character in her first appearance, but I'll get to that in a little bit. Sonic Rush is a fast-paced, frantic 2D Sonic game that for the most part is actually pretty good, but it falls short in a few frustrating ways. The main gimmick of the game is the implementation of the tension gauge, which fills up when you defeat enemies or do mid-air tricks. When filled, it allows you to use the boost, which instantly ramps up your speed, allowing you to reach higher ledges and also lets you plow past and knock out enemies like a speeding truck. The game's plot is explained through text dialogue cutscenes, so there is some story explanation here, unlike most of Sonic's classic 2D outings. I'll save all the intricate details, but just know the game involves the clashing of dimensions, which is why Blaze is not only here, but the game's new antagonist, Eggman Nega, the Eggman from Blaze's dimension. Now, the level design here is for the most part pretty solid. It has fast-paced rails and loops, harkening back to classic stages like Chemical Plant Zone or Hydro City Zone, and coupled with the boost, the gameplay is overall pretty kinetic, except for, when it isn't. See, Dimps, the team behind the Advance series, is responsible for this one, and if you've played those, you'll know they for some reason have a weird obsession with bottomless pits, and they seem to completely take the gloves off for this one. On top of the excessive bottomless pits, there's also random bouts of awkward platforming that's not only really uncomfortable and sketchy to do, but it also completely breaks up the pace of the game. 1 second, you're blasting through a stage at the speed of sound, and the next thing you know, you're juggling between the jump button and D-pad trying to awkwardly hop across a series of platforms which, more often than not, are hovering above a bottomless pit. Luckily, though, playing as Blaze mitigates this quite a bit. She's a bit slower than Sonic, but she also has a hover ability that can be used by pressing the right shoulder button. I didn't find this out until I played a ton of the game as Sonic, but I would say that playing as Blaze definitely makes the game a bit more bearable, as her hover ability makes the platforming a good deal more forgiving. Also, the boss fights in the game are actually pretty fun and about 100 times better than anything seen in the Advance trilogy. Unlike the rest of the game, which utilizes both screens on the DS for gameplay, the boss fights are relegated to the top screen, using the bottom screen for the boss's health bar. The bosses give a decent challenge without being too difficult or frustrating, though they can drag on a bit too long sometimes since the bosses take so many hits and you can only attack once per cycle. It's not that obnoxious on the first fight, but if you, for whatever reason, happen to die, having to restart the fight from the beginning can prove to be pretty annoying. Overall, Sonic Rush is pretty good, but it definitely suffers from some classic Dimps game design. So 2 years later, a follow-up to Sonic Rush was released entitled Sonic Rush Adventure. This is honestly a weird one. The gameplay itself is essentially identical to the first game. The soundtrack I think is a little bit better, and I even think the level design overall is a bit more polished, when you actually get to see it, that is. If you couldn't tell by the title, Sonic Rush Adventure took a slightly different approach than its predecessor and put way more of an emphasis on that adventure part. Out of the multiple hours that I played this game, only about a third or less of that was actually spent tearing up 2D Sonic levels. The game is super super padded out with not only really long text box cutscenes, but also with glorified minigames that gate your progression to each new zone. Basically, the game's different zones are split up between different islands that you need to sail to, but you need to use one of 4 different vehicles to access them. When piloting one of these vehicles, you have to play through a pretty boring minigame to sail to whatever destination you're headed towards. It's nothing difficult, but it's not exactly engaging, and it pretty much just serves as a time waster. As I said, there are 4 vehicles in the game. You need to have Tails build them before you're able to use them. To build them, you need materials that you get as a reward for completing the different stages depending on the score you get when you clear them. And unless you get an S rank, you'll inevitably end up needing to replay stages you've already completed multiple times just to get the arbitrary items that the game requires you to have to play the next stage. This exists for the sole purpose of padding out the length of the game. They put grinding in a Sonic game, and not the good type of grinding. At the very least, though, the bosses are a lot better. Gone is the issue with being able to only hit a boss once per cycle, and now you can just wail on them like a traditional 2D Sonic game. And this drastically cuts down the amount of time it takes to beat each boss, making them way more fun and more bearable. Sonic Rush Adventure bothers me. If it wasn't for all the extra padding they put into the game, I think I'd say it's actually a good step up from the first game. When I actually got to play 2D Sonic stages, I found myself enjoying these more, but the amount of time it takes to be able to do that isn't exactly worth it in my opinion. I don't think the game is necessarily bad at all, and maybe the extra stuff they threw in appeals to some people, but I can't say I'm one of them. Also, Blaze is here again. A year later, in 2008, Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood came out. If you didn't already know this game existed, the idea of BioWare making a Sonic the Hedgehog RPG probably sounds insane, but like insane enough to maybe actually be good, right? Well, it didn't pan out that way, and Sega effectively put the Blue Blur's name on something that if you told me was a Flash game, I'd probably believe you. Now, normally, I try to invest at least a good chunk of time into the games that I cover on videos like these, but I couldn't bring myself to play this one for more than 30 minutes. I realize this is a cop-out, but I feel no shame here. Now, I will say, the totally real Nintendo DS I was playing on was for some reason not rendering the game right, making certain assets for some reason not appear beyond the top half of the bottom screen, which is why my footage looks messed up. But honestly, even if the game was running flawlessly, I don't think that would do much to make this any more bearable. Also, it doesn't help that you can't use the D-pad to traverse the overworld for some reason, and the game requires you to move around with the stylus, or in my case, a mouse. Now, if you've ever heard anything about this game at all, there's probably a good chance you've heard how bad the soundtrack and overall sound design is. Apart from the track that's currently playing in the background right now, I'll spare you the distress, but just know that all the music is awkwardly dissonant and hard on the ears, and most, if not all, of the sound effects sound like they were downloaded straight from a stock library of cartoon sounds like a Hanna-Barbera bumper. From what I've played, the battles are pretty terrible. I obviously didn't play far enough in to really get a full grasp on the battle system, but then again, the game didn't do anything to make it remotely fun to begin with. Also, during some random encounters, for some reason, the game makes you play this little endless runner type minigame before you can even start the battle, and it also likes to randomly throw it in during the middle of a fight too, breaking up the pace of an already mindless affair. Trust me, I'd love to have more to say about this one, but I think even if my life depended on it, I'd still be a bit reluctant to sink time into this. It'd be one thing if I was doing a whole video dedicated to Sonic Chronicles, but I think for this video, I more than got the gist of what this game's bringing to the table. No thanks. As they often have been known to do for about 1 million different platforms, Sega released a collection of Sonic games for the DS called Sonic Classic Collection. It's a super bare-bones compilation of Sonic 1 through 3, as well as Sonic and Knuckles in both Knuckles and Sonic 2 and 3. When I say bare bones, I mean there isn't even like a startup screen or anything. The game boots up and you're at the title screen. There's no fancy menu animations, all the games are just emulated, and the only extras to speak of are an image gallery and an option to view the credits. Personally, I remember actually enjoying this one a bit when I was younger, but going back to it, it's honestly pretty shoddy. I think I was probably just satisfied with having the classic Sonic games all fully playable on my DS, but playing it now, not only is the game a bit squished due to the DS's screen, causing not only a distorted aspect ratio but some glitchy looking assets, but there's also a good deal of input lag as well, and the sound emulation is especially bad and difficult to listen to. This collection is at best serviceable, but considering Sonic the Hedgehog Genesis came out on the GBA, this is admittedly quite a step up from that. Beggars can't be choosers, I guess. So Sonic Colors just so happens to be my favorite and probably the most well-polished game out of the ones I'm covering today. But despite that, I don't have all that much to say about it, and that's basically because it's entirely derivative of the Sonic Rush games. It's for all intents and purposes Sonic Rush 3, only with added gimmicks pulled from Sonic Colors and the lack of Blaze as a playable character. This has not only the best level design out of all the Rush-style games, but it also trims away almost 100% of the fat. There are a lot of text-filled cutscenes, but if you really want, you can just avoid them all entirely by just pressing the start button. Doing that gives you a straight-up 2D Sonic game with no filler, no silly minigames besides the obligatory special stages, and no grinding or silly objectives that gate your progression. The only thing standing between you and progress in the game is finishing stages and beating bosses. I can't say I'm a huge fan of the Wisps, but while I don't love them, I don't really think they take too much away from the pace of the game, and I think their inclusion is fine. Sonic also has a bit better of a moveset as well. They got rid of the trick system, and in its place are more modern Sonic mechanics like the homing attack. There are some extra challenges you can complete alongside the main stages, but I didn't really care enough to play them. They're pretty much just new challenges set in stages you've already completed. Don't let the name fool you. Sonic Colors is wholeheartedly a part of the Sonic Rush series, and it just so happens to be what I think is the best one at that. And that about wraps it up. I think despite Sonic Rush Adventure being a little bit of a low point, all three of those games were actually pretty enjoyable, high-quality games, and I think they stand out more than the advanced games of the previous generation. Not so much for their style, but I think the Rush series games kept a more consistent level of quality than the advanced series did. Aside from that little blemish of Sonic Chronicles, I think Sega managed to maintain a pretty high bar of quality when representing Sonic on the DS. Good on them. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there on screen you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too. And thanks again to Surfshark for sponsoring this video.